champions sting.
You suffer the same fate as the great Varashta.
Hopefully there's not any other mechanics that auto-lose us.
This only ends one way. Your fate binds you.
Whoops.
You are not in control. There can be no escape. The sands of time wait for no one. You may help. You are not in control. Your fate binds you. The sands of time wait for no one. You possess. Rid yourself of your illusions. Wither into nothing. Back, you flow. The sun shift till dawn.
I'm a winner.
The winter second I made you, King. And I have unmade you.
Got it. See what it is. Let's see what it is. Notables get dex, notables get gain is extra. Gain is extra and dex. Hello and welcome, Exiles, to another update to the Archmage Stormweaver character. This time with a lot more information to help people following the builds in terms of gear acquisition. I went ahead and took my time to update the guide itself and add a very crucial section, which essentially is going over how to get some good gear, along with custom setup searches to find items that will be ideal for the build, as well as some FAQ. Now, first off, I want to go over the trade search stuff because it's very important for gear upgrades and making your character work. One of the most important things by far when making a build is your gearing. It's like, I don't want to say 75% of whether or not your character works well, but it's a very large percentage, and I can't stress that enough. The way this search works is I have set up a filter that has a weighted sum. This essentially is me assigning a value to each one of these stats and saying, I want a ring that has a minimum value of 265 based on the weightings I've given these modifiers. So like when you search this ring, there's 5,800 rings that show up with at least 265 weight. And if I go and I click the weighted sum, it'll search by the highest weighting. You can see here this one that comes out at a 490 weight has a lot better stats. A bunch of res, bunch of mana, a bunch of life. It is giving you something that's a high value. The idea here is if you're searching for an item, I set a decent weight here, which you can adjust as you upgrade. So for example, when you start out, maybe you start out with a 265 ring. This will give you back like a 1x ring that has, you know, mana, res, open affixes, cast speed, mana, like just a generic 2-stat, 3-stat item is what this should be giving you back. And then when you get a stronger, you know, financial standing, you know, you have a lot more X to spend and you want to upgrade your gear, you can just simply go in here and update the weighting. You can say, okay, 265 weight, that ring served me well. I can then update the weighting, and all of a sudden you're looking at stronger rings, you know, 10x rings, etc. That's the idea. I have this set up for essentially every gear slot. All I'd recommend is as you go through the campaign, as every time you drop an X, use that X to buy yourself an upgrade. I'll give you an example right here. In game, this is gear I assembled with just 1x per gear slot. I went through and I bought a gear piece for 1x each, and I went ahead and implemented this as the set 2 gear piece, which essentially is 10x of gear of using my trade search, where you adjust the weightings and you say, okay, I just want a 1x item, and you go through and you buy things. I would say priorities for you in the early game are going to be, number 1, your weapon. The first thing you want to start splurging on and investing in more, maybe when you have 5 extra X after you've bought a 1x item for every other gear slot, is buying a 5x weapon, something like that. One of the biggest priorities for damage. Other things are Everlasting Gaze, Midnight Braid. Both of those are very big key pieces to upgrade your defenses. If you want to start pushing into yellow, red maps to upgrade your defenses, those are key pieces. Another key piece is a chess piece. A good chess piece versus a bad chess piece could be like 400 ES versus 700 ES. And that difference is the difference in just a almost perfect helmet, for example, which can roll up to 300 ES with all good rolls. But that's kind of like a rounding error in how good not rounding errors, that's not the right term, but the point is the difference in a really good chess piece and a bad chess piece is worth like in the entirety of a different gear slot in terms of like a super min-maxed helmet, if that makes sense. So certain gear pieces have a bit more value than others. Strongest gear piece is probably your weapon, then your chess piece, then probably, you know, your amulet with Everlasting Gaze, then maybe your helmet, then maybe your shield, so on and so forth. That's just the stress, the importance of this, and I've set up these filters. One thing I should say is this filter does not consider item level or level requirement. So say you're in the campaign, you're a level 40 character. All you need to do to make sure the item that shows up is relevant for you is you see this requirements tab right here. Simply go here and say, okay, I'm a level 50 character. I don't want to see anything that's above level 50. Set the requirement to level 50. And then potentially I would recommend you're going to need to lower. Maybe you need to lower the level requirement of the item. Maybe you don't. For example, this +2 proj, which is just 2 levels for Spark, for example, shows up. Cast speed, +1 proj, mana, this still shows up. So maybe you don't need to adjust the weighting, but keep in mind, if you're buying a lower level item, there's less available stats that can occur because certain mods can't occur until they're higher level items. So keep that in mind. Just while you're leveling through the campaign, every time you drop an X, that is another gear upgrade you could have, and just simply go and adjust the weighting some here. And also, if you find that there's certain stats that you don't really want for your character, feel free to adjust the weightings here, as well as, let's say you're just trying to fix a res. Let's say you have all your gear slots figured out except, let's say, your boots, and you want lightning res. You need lightning res. You have fire and cold, they're capped. Maybe you could put an and filter and put lightning res in there to guarantee that the outcome you show is going to be a lightning res, and maybe you know for sure that you need at least 20 lightning res. There you go. That's all you need to do. So that's how you work with the custom filters or gear search I've set up. I highly recommend using this. Over time, the market might correct for a lot of people using the same search, but ultimately, as the market gets saturated, more people upgrade their gear, they're going to sell their old gear, and I think it will correct where a lot of this stuff is 1x gear, and just keep updating the weighted sum to a higher number when you want to start upgrading and getting better pieces. Another thing I should say is normally on a weighted sum, I could put value to having an open affix because technically that means you can still slam and there's a chance to improve your piece. I couldn't do that yet. That's not supported with the PoE2 search yet, but in the future, that's probably something I will include because if there's an open affix and you can slam on it, you can add value to the item. On top of that, I also want to stress the importance of runes. While you're going through the campaign, res runes are king. Simply just try to fix your res. That is the very, very important thing. It's going to greatly influence how tanky your character feels. Whatever you're doing as you're upgrading pieces, just know this gear piece is not permanent. fix your res when you can, and then afterwards, when you start min-maxing a little bit more, if your res is fixed, I would recommend, number one, iron runes on body armor and helmet, and then flat mana on your gloves, boots, and shield. Eventually, when you get more min-maxy, go for percent mana, Soul Core of Zodalotl. This is just strictly better than the flat mana on the gloves, boots, and shield. And I haven't mathed it out, but it might beat out doing percent ES on helmet. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't do the math on it. I think percent still wins on helmet, but you'd have to do the math. And percent definitely wins on body armor. So that's the idea. If you have gear pieces, spend 10x on each for 1x per gear piece, and then 1x buying yourself some Artificer's Orbs, and then go through and add sockets to your items, and then go through and add on your iron runes to pieces. So for example, like look at this chest piece. It has 370 ES. What happens when I add 2 iron runes to it? It goes to 470. That's 100 ES gain. Don't forget to do your runes. They're very, very important. But yeah, hopefully that breaks down early gearing for the character. I also have added to the planner a FAQ section for frequently asked questions about why I'm doing certain things: Rising Tempest, Anoint, what vials to get in the campaign, when to swap a CI, how to get strength for your shield, what runes to use, randomly dying if you have AES and mana still left over, some stuff like that. So go ahead and look at that note section. There might be some questions answered there. I've added in the support for what things to gem cut, which is basically just Spark and Archmage. You can gem cut some other things, but those are the 2 things that really matter for getting a pretty big damage upgrade. And then on top of that, I have added one thing that I'm trying out, and I'm not convinced it's worth it, but I'm trying out just to see how it feels, which is I have swapped over to Elemental Storm. This is a new thing I'm going to try out over the next couple days, get a feel for if it actually feels good to me. I'm hesitantly going to say I think it might be our end game setup, because it basically crits and creates this duration storm. We have a bunch of skill effect duration because we are playing Spark, which is synergistic with Elemental Storm. It's a duration skill that you can proc multiple times. I might end up using it in late game. I think it requires a bit more crit to really feel good, but that's something I'm testing out, and maybe you might like it as well. So potentially something to consider while you're playing this character. Ultimately, that is the primary update side to the character. I didn't really level too much yesterday. I was mainly trying to farm myself a custom upgrade for my character. There's these jewels that give, basically they give some really big stat on notables in radius, or they give some really decent stat on every small passive. I'll show you a case what this looks like in game. For example, I put this on this right here, and you'll notice it says int and gain is extra on these notables in the radius. That is new because of this jewel. Now the jewel I'm trying to farm is 1% mana on small nodes, which would mean if I end up doing a tree swap where I'm going for these stun threshold nodes instead of these ones, as well as like maybe I go for crit here, I could be looking at, 1% mana, 1% mana, 1% mana, 1% mana, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, it adds up, right? As well as potentially, percent int on a notable or some other useful stats. There's a lot of good things on this time loss jewel, and that's something I'm hunting for right now. Unfortunately, Sanctum doesn't really give that much XP, so I did it like all yesterday. I didn't get a level. I didn't really change much on my build, and that's why our character hasn't changed too much outside of me testing out the new Elemental Storm. So that's the current thing we're working on towards upgrading the character, and that hopefully gives you some more tools to work with if you're following on the build, and something to look forward to upgrading your character. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. This is the update to the Archmage day 8, I think, or day 7. Not 100% sure. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.